Pleasure to be here. We're going to start out with a line from Monty Python. And now for something completely different. It's a pleasure to be here. It's good to see where my tuition money goes, since I'm supporting a few students here right now. What you may notice up here, if you're very observant, that there are two of us instead of one, which certainly breaks the rules of TED. There's a reason for that. What we have here is we have a scientist and we have an engineer. And if you look at some of the earlier talks we had today, it's sort of like the Cubs and the White Sox. So they're both parts of the same whole. Jeff is the head of our battery group. He's our lead scientist for battery research and development. He leads a team of people that are inventing and have invented the batteries of today, the batteries that are in things right now, and they're in the process of inventing the battery of tomorrow.
And Don, we had an elaborate introduction prepared, but now we can skip right through most of that thanks to the introduction you just heard. Thank you, I agree. Thank you for inviting us here. We really appreciate it. I hope we live up to the expectations of TED here today. I think we will. Don, as you just heard, heads up our transportation research facility, and it is a state-of-the-art, world-class facility where they engineer, design, and test some of the most advanced vehicle technologies in the world. And regarding two of us being here, we are both experimentalists, so I'd start by saying, yes, we're doing an experiment. We are doing an experiment here today, and it's not the one that might be obvious that there are two of us here. In fact, I found out this morning it's not unique. A married couple did it last year at TEDx here in Illinois, which makes me wonder, Don, about you and me here. But the other kind of experiment you might think we're doing is scientist versus an engineer presenting together, but that's not the real experiment. Of the 2,800 employees at Argonne National Laboratory, Don and I are the two chattiest employees in the whole place. And we were told, can you split 18 minutes and tell us everything you do? So that's the real experiment. So
and these are all his minutes up to this point.
Yeah, that's right. You want to introduce the topic today?
We're going to be talking about Little Can of Sunshine, and just to go right to the end and to spoil it for you, it's a battery. So the rest of it will fit from there. Just take it.
And the point is, energy comes from the sun, whether it's in the form of plants or in the form of coal or oil. That energy, as we use it, ultimately comes from the sun, and we want to put it in a can to move cars around. So the question is, what is the big topic we want to talk about today? We were trained and we thought about what topic are we supposed to talk about, and what we do is fairly arcane, and you'll see it in about 10 minutes, how arcane and obscure our research is. But when we thought about what is the big topic, what gets us up in the morning, what we reflected on was the Declaration of Independence. The big idea was had about 240 years ago by some British men who in Congress came together and talked about what it means to have the opportunity to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So what we're going to do is connect that big theme. Don and I obviously can't take credit for that big idea, but we're here to tell you and convince you that the basic materials research we do and the engineering we do down to the molecular level is aimed back at enabling us to be free. And I'm going to give you one example of that. We have myriad data we could show you and talk about as to why we would connect electrification of vehicles to the Declaration of Independence, and I'll give you one data point. Every year, we send $400 billion out of our economy to import oil into the United States. So think about that the next time you're pumping gas into your car, and this is the message, the medium and the message tied together here. $400 billion, over $1 billion a day. And to put that in perspective, the entire Economic Recovery Act put in place when President Obama was first elected was about $800 billion. Last year in 2010, we spent almost $200 billion in the war in Afghanistan. And those are both very high water marks, and they're both very contentious numbers. And yet, we send $400 billion a year offshore to import energy from people who we can't control. And that, by definition, means we're giving up our liberty.
Okay, so what is energy? First of all, let's define it. Trained as an engineer. So as an engineer, energy is heat, or it's light, or it's speed, or it's altitude. Those are the ways we measure it.
And as a scientist, energy is the potential to do work. And that potential cannot be created or destroyed.
But as we're going to discuss it right now, suffice it to say that energy is basically sunshine. Everything we have here, and you can argue there's some things that are outside that definition, but everything we have here, food, fuel, etc., it comes from the sun. So it's a matter of how much sun we've got, how much is stored up, and how that sun is actually used and utilized. It's the form of energy that we have. Now, from when we were first created, from the first cavemen that were out there, energy basically defined our existence and our civilization. How far we could go was defined by how much energy we could actually carry. Essentially, you could look at it as the age of energy. Now, the first people were limited by how much food they could carry in their own bellies, about 2,000 calories. You could call it the age of glucose or the age of sugar. It was about how far they could get. That's about the amount of sunshine that grew a plant per day. That was what defined them, was how far they could go on that.
And this is the best graphic you could come up with for a caveman.
Well, we went through the C-SPAN database, and there are no pictures of cavemen on record that weren't copyrighted, so we had to do the best we could. But very quickly, we moved on to the age of wood. Once we discovered fire, we discovered a concentrated source of energy that was more concentrated than the food that we could use in our belly or carry with us. Essentially, wood is sunshine stored, maybe many, many years of sunshine stored, and it allows us to release it when we want to release it. It's the first form of energy storage that we had beyond just pure sugar. You could release it on demand, you could use it for work, you could use it to cook, and you could use it to turn the nighttime into day. But that was the first big jump that we took. Now, the age of wood peaked about 1805 or 1810. That's when we used the most wood possible, and many places began to be depleted, and they ran out of wood. And in parts of the world, they discovered a mineral that had an even more concentrated form of energy, something that they could use and they could release at will, but it was a far more concentrated form, and that was coal. Coal was literally the ability to store thousands of years' worth of sunshine and release it when you wanted it. And that concentrated form at first was just kind of moved to provide the same things that wood had provided. But what happened was, as we understood this new energy density and we understood the consequences of this, we began to discover new things. For instance, the Industrial Revolution was a direct result of using coal. From there, we moved to having sufficient energy density that we could use transport in the form of steam engines, ships, rail, big engines. It sparked industrialization, and that was something that was really unforeseen when we started using coal. Coal, the age of coal peaked in about 1920. That was when the biggest percentage of all our energy came from coal. And we'd been well into the next age at that point. The next stage was the age of petroleum. Petroleum, more importantly, gasoline, was actually a poisonous byproduct of making kerosene. Kerosene was for light. We used the oil to make kerosene, and essentially we had to throw the gasoline away. Well, eventually, this very concentrated form of energy, we realized that there were uses for it. We began to use it in engines, in internal combustion engines. Literally thousands and thousands of years' worth of sunshine could be packed into tiny, tiny areas. So we had the ability and the energy density to carry a great deal of energy with us. From that came personal transportation. It opened up the world. It freed us from where we were stuck, from the villages that we were stuck in. More important than that, it actually launched us into the air. With that kind of energy density, we could fly. Ultimately, we could fly very fast, and that led us to actually breaking the bonds of Earth. Those also were unforeseen circumstances from this new age, this age of petroleum, this energy density. And it was that freeing that took us to a place that we really didn't expect to be. There have been negative consequences and positive consequences, but nonetheless, it was that step to the new age that really took us to this place. Now, what's the next age? The electron. We've been in the electron age for a very long time. We've talked about it, but there are inherent shortcomings to the electron. The problem with electrons and using electrons for energy is that we can only use them exactly when we make them. They have to come right down the line, and they've got to be produced right then, because other than a small amount of storage, we don't have any way to store electrons. Now, electrons are a great form of energy. They're fantastic and clean, and really every sort of fuel we have can be used to make electrons, but we don't have a good way to store it as it stands right now. You look at growth over the last, projected growth for the next 20 years, prime energy demand is going to be, all the growth is going to be electricity. We're going to need massive quantities of electricity, and that's going to really dictate how we're going to do it. And fortunately, we have many different ways to make it, so we'll be able to make the electricity. But intrinsically, we're limited by the fact that everything we make and everything that uses electricity right now has a wire hanging out of the back of it, or has some sort of a disadvantage. Now, the main driving force for using all of this power has been, and all this energy, has been transportation. Transportation, we've been attempting to electrify for a very long time to get us off the dependency we have. And the electric vehicle is something that in 1910 there were more electric vehicles than there were gasoline engines. It was very popular at the time, but ultimately it died. It lost its competition. And it died because the battery wasn't sufficient. You couldn't get the range. You couldn't get the energy density that you needed. So we weren't really ready to step into that next generation.
Don, that's a sweet-looking ride. Tell them.
That's a Porsche. It's one of the early Porsches. And guys out cruising. In 1995, we made a second run at the electric vehicle. This was the EV1. General Motors made this. It's a fantastic vehicle. In many ways, it's superior to electric vehicles we have today. As you can see from the title, Who Killed the Electric Car? They made a movie about the fact that this eventually wasn't really a commercial success. And you could say a lot of things, but those of us who are inside know why it wasn't a commercial success. It was the battery again. You couldn't store enough electrons on site. You couldn't capture the sun and put it into a can and use it the way we wanted to use it. Now, many people say that the electric car really didn't die, and that's true. It didn't die. It went dormant, and it's been waiting for the battery that will come out, the battery that can really solve the problem. But we still are faced with the problem that we can't capture the lightning and put it in a jar and use it the way we want to, at least until now. Theoretically, we finally hit the point where we're starting to look at batteries that have the density that they need and that have the correct chemistry to store sufficient electrons that they have the potential to meet the needs of vehicles. And as you look at the needs of vehicles, you begin to realize that they actually can meet far more than just transportation needs.
So the question is, at this point in our talk, what is the key to happiness? And I get the easy questions. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What is the key to happiness? I'll remind you, I'm a physical chemist, so I like talking about molecules and reactions and bonds. So my answer to that is a little perverse and probably disgusting, possibly. The key to happiness is nanostructured materials like the black powder in this vial. And I'll explain what I mean by that right now.
Happiness is a little vial of powder.
Black powder,
okay,
not white powder. Here depicted, we show, this is a Chevrolet Volt, which is a new electric vehicle that was rolled out last year by GM, General Motors. And there's a little confusion out in the marketplace. It has a gas engine on board, but that gas engine does nothing but create electrons for the battery. It's an electric vehicle that has on board a generator so that it can recharge the battery. And what you see here is a battery in front of the car. This is the battery that goes in the Volt, weighs about 600 pounds. It's about as big as I am, and it's T-shaped. A gigantic battery. And inside that battery are several hundred cells. This is a single cell built by LG Chemical that's inside the Chevy Volt battery. You can see it's thin, it's coated in plexiglass, you can ignore that, but it's a thin pouch that is a battery. So this is a cell, much like a AA battery you'd use in your Wii remote, except it's much bigger and holds a lot more energy. And there's several hundred of those inside of a car battery, an electric car battery. Inside that cell are layers of materials, coated metals, and what they're coated with are these little powders. And if you look under the microscope at the powders, you see what looks like this. So this is a 5 to 10 micron diameter sphere, and if you go even further in, you can see there's some nanostructured materials that make up that sphere of material. Now physically, that doesn't look much different if you were to look at titanium dioxide that's in paint on the walls here in this room. It doesn't look much different from the silica that's in your toothpaste that you use every day to abrade your teeth while you brush your teeth. But it is very different because it's made up of a chemistry, of a material that can store energy, and it can release energy. And the way a battery works, the only difference between everything you just heard from Don in terms of burning wood, burning coal, burning oil, and using a battery to move you around and create power, they're both chemical reactions. But when you burn wood or you burn gasoline, that is an irreversible reaction. You break a bond, you create heat, you create gas, and you use that to generate power to move you around. But you can't reverse that reaction. The reaction in a battery is different in two ways. It's still just a chemical reaction, but importantly, it spits out an electron when you perform the reaction. And you have the shower cascade of electrons that turns into electric current that you can turn into power to move things around. The other big difference is it's a reversible reaction. So you can supply those electrons back into the material by plugging your device into the wall, whether that's an iPod or your computer or, in this case, electric cars. So that is a key and important difference. It's a reversible reaction. We don't consume what we use to get the energy like we would. I mean, we consume the coal to create the electricity, but we don't consume the battery like we would gasoline. Now, this is a model of a lithium atom. And what you see here is so put your chemistry hats on for a second.
You picked on the Flintstones and you have a clay model for
yeah,
an atom.
That's right. This is just the nucleus with 3 protons, 3 neutrons, and 3 electrons. And the reason I put this graphic up here is that if you think back to I hope you were all taught about the periodic table. This is a very small and light atom. Helium and hydrogen are the only ones that are smaller and lighter. So if you want to pull off one electron off of an atom like this in a reaction like the ones I just described in an electric car battery, you want to have the smallest and lightest and most compact atoms to pull one electron off of each of those atoms. If you think about sodium, or if you think about lead, and you might be removing 2 electrons off lead, you're talking about a mass for those atoms that is 10, 20, 30-fold over what you see for lithium. So when you hear about lithium-ion batteries and lithium metal batteries, the reason you hear about them is because they're tiny, small, compact, high-energy atoms. Now the batteries that are out there today, so at Argonne we work in materials like the ones I showed you here, and we develop new materials and they make it into cars like the Chevy Volt. And those are great batteries. They'll get you 40 miles before you need a recharge. Problem is they only get you 40 miles and they're pretty expensive materials. So the question becomes for a place like Argonne National Laboratory and our research partners, not only in the US but around the world, partners at Berkeley, partners at MIT, etc. Look at this graph for a second and remember this is a logarithmic scale. And what you see is gasoline is way up here and lithium ion is down here in terms of how much energy you can store in the device. So you're talking about at least 10 times the density of energy you can store in gasoline compared to lithium ion. So the question becomes, as we move, and we are moving as a race, every automaker in the world, every major and minor automaker in the world is in the process of rolling out an electric vehicle that has a lithium-ion battery in it. The question becomes, in the future, as that market begins to open and the price of gasoline and oil continues to go up, how do we move to these more advanced systems, which I won't describe here today, but there are electrochemical systems out there that get us significantly closer to the capacity to store energy as gasoline. And that's what we're working on now. And what we want to do then is put those materials into the can and fill it with sunshine in the form of energy.
So what we're really talking about, how far will this go? Energy density like that, the energy density of gasoline. That's a battery about this size that can take your car 10, 15 miles. It can take a motorcycle 100 miles. It's a battery that's this small that is lightweight, that can be quickly filled with electrons and discharge of its electrons. It's the possibility of, say, powering your chainsaw or your microwave or your plasma TV or whatever implement you have with the power that you have in your pocket right now. Power in your pocket, you can take it with you. Energy density like this could go a very long way. It can enable renewables. Things like wind and sun and tide energy has one intrinsic shortcoming, and that's that it never's there when you need it. And that's the problem with renewables. But if you had cheap, easy ways to carry the energy from where it is to where you need it, you have the possibilities of really changing the way we look at the world. Power, limitless power, wherever we need it, however we need it. We could take it and use it to get places we've never gotten before. Fill up a can of electrons on the way, honey. On the way home from work, honey, I need some more electrons. Everybody could have one. I need to drive further. I think I'll take 2, because I'm going to go a couple hundred extra miles today. It open up the way we think about energy and power. Now, are there drawbacks? Yeah, there are certainly unintended consequences. In fact, we're counting on unintended consequences. Some will be negative. Some will be positive. On the negative side, if we never have to use a muscle again, the future may be just like WALL-E, where you never really have to get up, and we could misuse the technology. The plus side, what are the unintended consequences? We don't know. People entering the industrial age didn't know, and people entering the petroleum age didn't know, but it was certainly amazing what happened. The bottom line is, when you get this kind of power, things can happen, and the generation that gets it has to decide what it is they're going to do with it.
Which brings us back, if you flip one more, brings us back to the big idea, the Declaration of Independence. I'll reiterate what I said earlier. Our job, what we work on back at Argonne and our partners around the world, and certainly in this country at other labs and universities and companies, our job is to open that door back to a new era of prosperity and freedom and energy security. So what Don just told you about and what I just told you about is that we're opening that door in the research that we're doing down to the fundamental materials level. The question is, what will you as a society, as a member of society, do when you pass through that door?
So the medium for us is energy. And the message is it's a new era. And we're going to work collectively with another couple thousand engineers and scientists to prepare for you this kind of energy density. It's going to be available. The question we can't answer is, what are you going to do with it?